We come to the 10th and the last of the Mahavidyas. This is an opening series where we have only inaugurated rather than gone in depth of a confluence space between psychoanalysis and thus Mahavidya. Today we'll go into the 10th Mahavidya, Kamala. In this series, we have just started off outlining the confluence space between Dasha Mahavidya and psychoanalysis. Over time, we will go into the depth of it. This enterprise is so necessary because Dasha Mahavidya deals with self-knowing, self-transformation, self-healing, acquiring mystical powers, changing the world. Psychoanalysis deals with two of the points: self-knowing, self-healing. Other parts of self-transformation, mystical experiences, powers, development of faculties and competencies, capability to change the world, those aspects are out of psychoanalysis, but very much within the scope of Dasha Mahavidya. Even in this limited confluence, there are treasures to be found if we excavate enough and excavate rightly. This series opens up that excavation. And in times to come, we will go into a deeper aspects of that confluence space, which will enrich both psychoanalysis and the practice of Dasha Mahavidya. The first part is easy to accept and understand. The second part seems narcissistic and megalomaniac. However, I do believe that if we take elemental knowledge from psychoanalysis or Western sciences, they can help enrich and clarify and make more objective and reduce this redefining the same thing in various words, which is very pervasive in Eastern spirituality and mysticism. So with this background, today we come to the last of the 10 Mahavidyas, Kamala. The story of origin is very simple. The Devas and the Asuras, they come together for Sagar Manthan. Story in the tradition tells us that Devas and Asuras both got to know somehow that if they do Sagar Manthan, which is churning of the ocean, and the churning of the ocean has to be done by, of course, the ocean is very large. So for churning the ocean, you require a large churning instrument, which is supposed to be Kailasha, a part of Himalayas, also known as the Merudand in some stories, which also metaphorically signifies something else, which we'll come to in a moment. And that Sagar Manthan, in that churning of the ocean, required strength of both the Devas and the Asuras. Neither of the group could do it all alone. So they came together with an understanding that the nectar of immortality which comes out from inside will be shared by both equally. And as the churning went on, different things started coming out of that churning process. And this outputs of the churning, well before the nectar of immortality would finally come out, these outputs were of different types. Some were very poisonous, which were taken in by Shiva, and others were more benign, happiness giving, profit giving. One of the positive entities that emerged out of that churning of the ocean, Sagar Manthan, was Kamala. So this is one of the stories of her origin, that she comes out of the Sagar Manthan process. Metaphorically, the human system full of fluids is taken to be that ocean. The spinal cord is taken to be the Merudand, the Kailasha or the Himalayas, that part of it which is used for churning. And the spiritual part of us and the dark, passionate part of us are deemed to be the Devas and the Asuras. And it is when both of them get into the churning process, then out of that churning, which is a psychological churning inside of us, out of that inner psychological churning, things come out. And obviously this is true in psychoanalysis also. We see that very clearly in ISTDP video recordings, that in that churning inside, first the poison comes out, the murderous rage, the torturous rage, the deep-seated sadness and guilt. And after that, the positive aspect of love comes out. So it's also depicted in the mythological tale of Sagar Manthan. We call it mythological because this is the best how we can describe it. Maybe it was historical, we don't know. Future researches will tell us. And this is one of the stories of origin of Kamala. Kamala is the lotus goddess among the Dash Mahavidyas. She is the goddess of prosperity, security, wealth, power, good luck. She is also the Devi of auspiciousness, and therefore she is also referred to as Shri, which is auspicious. Because Rishi Bhargav and his disciples extensively did sadhana of Kamala, she is also known as Bhargavi. She is depicted as seated on a lotus with a beautiful golden complexion. 4 elephants are showering her with spray from the jars of nectar. In the painting, we can see 2 elephants in the 2-dimensional painting. The elephants also are symbolic of power, of strength, of aristocracy, of fame, of something dependable, of something stable, of something loyal, of something very dutiful, very sincere. And therefore, this is not an ordinary symbol of a benevolent goddess, but also, apart from prosperity, she is also the goddess of social power, social security, and social good luck. So when we look at Dhumavati, she is the goddess of social sadness, everything that can go wrong in the social life of a person. Very concrete. There's nothing surreal, there's nothing metaphysical, there's nothing out of this world in the depiction or the bare story. It is about the concrete suffering of an individual in a given historical social situation. The opposite of that is true here. That again, we are not dealing with anything surreal, anything metaphysical, but we are dealing with concrete social prosperity, security, wealth, power, fame, good luck. So in one's concrete social existence, when one experiences the best of life, he is experiencing the boon of Kamala. And when he is experiencing the worst of his life, he is experiencing the flavor of Dhumavati. The Devi is depicted with four hands, all engaged in benevolence, giving out treasures and boons. She wears a jeweled crown of rare and precious gems, seated on a lotus with a smiling face. We no longer have the crematorium, the jackals howling, a garland of human skulls, hands holding freshly cut heads of human beings, bloods dripping out of them, weapons used for brutal killing of somebody. Those things are completely absent, and now we are looking at the benevolent, aesthetic, surreal, good, and socially happy aspect of human existence. In this way, the Dasha Mahavidyas cover all of life. They cover the deepest of fears. They cover the sublime flights of positive imagination. They cover the concrete social suffering. They cover the concrete social profits, the social goodness, social attainment, social happiness. And here we see, therefore, the goddess with a smiling face. The Bija mantra is Shrim, and Kamala is the Tantra equivalent of the Satvik Devi Lakshmi. Just as in Tantra, one of the things that happens is that the sadhana is fierce and intense. And it is a no holds barred sadhana. There are no boundaries of what is beyond the boundary. There is nothing beyond the boundary because there is no boundary. Because both the Vedic path and the Tantric path have to deal with all aspects of human experience, it is inevitable that some of the Devis would be common to both approaches. It is also inevitable because the Devis and the Devatas that have been enlisted in tradition are coming out of deep yogic experiences, very authentic, and that would be true regardless of which path you follow. So again, there happens a confluence because the deeper you go, you encounter the same thing. However, because of the fierce, the intense, and the no holds barred, no boundary approach of Tantra, what we have here is a series of deities which are counterparts of their sattvic forms in the Vedic process, Vedic path. So in the Vedic path, just as you have a Lakshmi, in the Tantric path, you have the Neela Lakshmi. In the Vedic path, you have Saraswati, and here you have Matangi. In the Vedic path, you have Ganesha, and here you have Aghor Ganesha. In the Vedic path, you have Shiva, and here you have Bhairava. Similarly, in the Vedic path, you have Lakshmi, and here you have Kamala. Out of Dash Mahavidyas, if you look at two very benign forms, they happen to be Tripura Sundari and Kamala. Tripura Sundari as the source of everything, a more philosophically wide Devi. Kamala more focused, but both of them benign, focusing on good aspects, happy aspects of human existence. And both are giving Devis. This also brings us to the core approach of Tantra, which is different from many of the spiritual schools on the Vedic or the yogic path. Many schools on the Vedic or the yogic path approach sadhana with asceticism, giving up of the world, giving up of desires which are worldly, giving up of experiences as entanglements or potential entanglements. Choosing the path of no versus the path of yes. But Tantra firmly is on the path of yes. We have discussed before the path of yes and the path of no, and all spiritual schools can be divided into these two. And the hybrid in between is the classical Vedic format of the Chaturvarna. Sorry, the not the Chaturvarna, but uh, the Chatur Ashram. So Tantra is firmly on the path of yes, that the world is not illusory, desires have to be lived out, and one needs money and power and fame in the world to live with respect, satisfy one's desire, and do one's sadhana without much trouble. Tantra does not see much value in using the hardships on the path of sadhana, for accelerating sadhana. Rather, Tantra largely believes that one should get into a position where the basic necessities of life, the basic money that you need, the basic security and power that you need in society, that has to be established, lived out, and in the ease of its light, you perform the sadhana, and this package is much faster, much easier than the other package of asceticism and austerity and suffering, because that also brings in helplessness, and that helplessness often leads to humiliation and succumbing to evil. So Tantra in that sense is as practical as spiritual it is. In modern times, we hear this popular phrase by Osho. He says Osho's approach is Buddha the Zorba, that both the spiritual and the material both are important, the inner and the outer both are important. This is not anything new because Tantra has been saying this for thousands of years. So the approach is Buddha the Zorba in Tantra, and both the Buddha and the Zorba are lived out under the guidance of a guru. This concrete world, this historical world, this practical world, no matter how petty, how banal, and how enticing it may be, and the subtle worlds, not easily accessible, both of them are concerns for Tantra. And therefore, we see across the journey of our Mahavidyas that there are Devis which help you focus on the innermost of your own feelings, your own anxieties, your own motivations, the most subtle worlds, and also there are Devis which help you focus on the most concrete social existence that you have. In that sense, the Dasha Mahavidya completes the full package of the subtle and the concrete, the inner and the outer, the spiritual and the practical. Given this background, many schools of Tantra, therefore, ask the student to first do a proto sadhana of Kamala. It's not a full sadhana, but a proto sadhana, and get the finance, security, and the social prestige part very secure. And then start the real sadhana of the Mahavidyas. Some, instead of doing a proto sadhana of the Mahadevi in some way, they first start with sadhana of Ganesha and then of Satvik Lakshmi in a very Satvik, non-risky way. And only after those things are done and the person is practically safely established in society, he is asked to start the real rigorous and fierce sadhana of the Mahavidyas. So although Kamala is the counterpart of Lakshmi, the sadhana is fierce and intense as of any Mahavidyas. And we don't know if some gurus also use the aghore features of sadhana to do the sadhana of Kamala. So the Devi and her origin and depiction and her outcomes of the sadhana may be very sattvic and rajasic, but the sadhana still can have tamasic elements, aghore elements. This Devi deals with prosperity, and here we have to be clear. The Western definition of prosperity is very limited, which is only financial. This is where the contemporary economics very wrongly revolves only on financial prosperity. So when we say poverty, it can be financial poverty, it can be poverty of knowledge, poverty of spirituality, poverty of aesthetics, poverty of arts, poverty of power, and all this poverty is integrally removed by Kamala. So Kamala bestows prosperity in all social aspects of life, not only financial. Some would say, why should Kamala not be the first Mahavidyas? That is because it can bring in the mass who is very interested in Kamala, but who are not interested in deeper inner work of Kali and Chinnamasta. And therefore, usually it is the last Mahavidya. Before the Mahavidya thing begins, as we said, you can have a proto sadhana or you can have usually the Satvik sadhana of Ganesha and Lakshmi. The ending of the Mahavidya process happens on the positive aspect, as should be the case for any psychological process, that you should end with a positive process, with a positive stage towards the end of the process. And the Mahavidya journey ends with Kamala, who is a very positive Devi. From a psychoanalytic standpoint, what are the psychological aspects the Devi and its sadhana deals with? The sadhana of Kamala deals in a very fundamental way with two aspects, giving and receiving. Of course, receiving we all like, but giving also is a part of this worship, giving and receiving. In psychoanalysis, we know how entangled these two things can be various with other things. Giving can be entangled with fear of destitution, with anal hoarding, with psychotic fears of being robbed, with fears of social shame, of being made a fool of, being mocked and being humiliated. It can be loaded with envy. Receiving can be entangled with fears of a dependent, of the fear of asking lest the other person attacks or leaves. The element of receiving is entangled with fear of attack, with fear of loss, with ethical fear of not being able to return what is being received, with superego bite of asking for something, with narcissistic attack on one's lack of being self-sufficient. So both of them are dealt with in this Mahavidya, the problems of giving and receiving, and all of them, all the elements which are entangled with giving and receiving. Happily being able to give and happily being able to receive. Overcoming any pathology related to giving or receiving. Security, prosperity, and social security are addressed by Kamala, and we all know how important they are. Because lack of security, prosperity, and social security and social prestige are inevitably linked to anxiety of the social type, which is underplayed in psychoanalysis. In theory, we say that pathology has biopsychosocial roots. But when it comes to practice, we focus only on the psycho aspect. We forget the bio aspect. We forget the socio aspects. But it's a very strong element, the socio aspect of anxiety. One of the fundamental sources of anxiety is the anxiety related to death, pain, and destitution. And all the three anxieties are activated the moment you are not socially in a safe position. If you don't have a stable job, a stable source of income, a stable standing in society, inevitably anxiety mounts. And often we underestimate the anxiety of death, which is entangled with anxiety of employment. And the anxiety of pain, of humiliation and emotional pain, which is entangled with instability in employment. We also underestimate the pathological fear and anxiety related to destitution. An irrational fear of destitution, so common in human beings. So, the practice of Kamala helps one reduce this to a great extent. In the practice of Kamala, we also come across dealing with greed because it's intrinsically related to giving and receiving. One more source of psychological healing is satisfaction of desire. If someone has just faced deprivation all around, it's very difficult to expect there should not be anything pathological in that person. Deprivation brings its own luggage of pathology. And therefore, satisfaction of desire to a reasonable extent helps us in establishing a more healthy part of oneself, gives us some freedom from that intense deprivation and the pathology it creates, and allows us to come to the state of giving from a pathological receiving and exploitation and snatching and robbing to giving. And this is possible only if a reasonable satisfaction of desire is achieved in the real life. If deprivation is very acute, there is no way without experience, complete mourning can be done. Also, there are some desires which are very sticky and they can be overcome only by experience. And they can be desires related to pleasure or aggression, or any psychic elemental for that matter. But certain things can be overcome only by experience. And this brings up the satisfaction of at least some part of our desires, and this is ensured in the sadhana of Kamala. Kamala also gives power, and prosperity and power enable us to experience freedom in the social context. It prevents trauma inflicted on us by others, which is very probable in dependence. Dependence is the highway to exploitation and trauma. And I'm not referring to dependence of a dependent personality. I'm referring to dependence in general in society. That dependence leads to domination and exploitation, and that in turn leads to trauma or anything pathological in the mind. So that is one of the sources of trauma, the real social situation of the person. This is addressed by the security and prosperity that Kamala brings. Kamala also brings fame and helps us satisfy one of our deepest desires. We underestimate the strength of this desire. Freud brought out the significance of the strength of the sexual desire, but the desire for fame is equally strong in human beings. And that has to be experienced and satisfied to some extent, and Kamala helps us do it. On the whole, when you put all of this together, Kamala helps us enhance our ego strength and enlarge and deepen our basket of positive experiences, which then become the positive and healthy centers of our good health. We all know the strength, the necessity, and the far-reaching consequences of positive experiences in our life. Kamala helps us have this deep, varied, wide, and enduring positive experiences, enhancing our quality of life. Thank you.